Night slips across the spinning planet, dragging a curtain of shadow over oceans and mountain ranges, pulling the world into stillness. Down beneath the cloud cover, past the glowing grids of cities and the winding curves of dark rivers, life slows its rhythm to meet the dark. We zoom in past the atmosphere, past the roofs and rain gutters, right down into the quiet corners of your room. Here, a specific breathing pattern harmonizes with the turning earth. Over 600 million domestic felines rest across the globe right now, breathing in unison. They occupy cushions in Tokyo, stretch across carpets in London, and curl into tight circles in Sao Paulo at this very moment. They blanket every single continent on this world except Antarctica. Their lungs expand and collapse in a synchronized wave of slumber, emitting a low, vibrating resonance that fills the quiet air. You listen to that sound. Tell me, softly in the comments below, from what quiet corner of the world are you listening to this, and what time is it there? While you rest, your ancestors negotiated a truce with the wild that continues inside your home tonight. Look at the history of human agriculture. Men and women captured the wild beasts of the plains, building fences of stone and wood to trap the wandering herds. They tamed the wild horses with leather and metal, broke the wills of giant aurochs to pull heavy ploughs through the mud, and forced the sheep and pigs to bend to human needs. We claimed authority over the beasts of the field. We changed their shapes and broke their spirits. Yet, the small creature purring at the foot of your bed never experienced a yoke or a chain. Cats chose to enter our homes on their own terms. Their skeletons mirror the frames of their untamed cousins prowling the brush, and their DNA remains an unbroken thread connecting them to the ancient shadows. They possess the exact same hunting reflexes, the same coiled muscles, and the same independence that allowed their ancestors to survive without human intervention. They don't need us. They can hunt and secure their own survival whenever they desire. It's a baffling truth. Why would an apex predator, a creature designed to kill with silent precision, voluntarily submit to a life surrounded by loud, clumsy apes? The answer lies buried under layers of time. It's a story of calculated patience. They didn't surrender. They simply observed our fires and recognized an opportunity. Let the thought sink into your mind as the shadows lengthen across your walls. You aren't merely harboring a pet. You host a perfect ghost of the ancient wilderness, wearing a coat of domestic colors. Think about the dogs sleeping on porches across the world. Humans spent generations selectively breeding wolves, twisting their bodies to create herders, guard dogs, and retrievers. We engineered their loyalty. The feline path looks completely different. They manipulated the boundaries of our world without changing their own nature. We didn't carve them into shape. They remain complete, untouched by the crude hands of human design. A feline jaw still holds the lethal force necessary to sever the spine of a mouse in a single bite. The retracting claws hidden inside those soft paws serve as pristine instruments of capture, unsullied by the centuries spent resting on velvet pillows. The paradox echoes through the silence of the night. A beast of pure predatory instinct rests its head on your blanket. The rhythmic rise and fall of its chest acts as a metronome for your own heartbeat. This animal listens to the wind outside your window, processes the ultrasonic scratching of creatures hidden inside the walls, and yet chooses to remain beside you. It's an elegant infiltration. They slip through the cracks of our civilization, adapting to the noise and chaos of human existence by tweaking a fraction of a percent of their inner code. They learn to tolerate the thunderous footsteps of humanity. They recognized the warmth radiating from our hearths. They trained us to offer them shelter, transforming themselves into the only species that achieved total global domination by acting passive. They didn't fight for supremacy. They just waited for us to open the door. 10,000 years ago, the ice that gripped the planet began to melt away, pulling back to reveal a warming Earth. The glaciers retreated toward the poles, leaving behind a shifting landscape of scrublands and rocky outcrops across North Africa and the Near East. The air grew thick with the dry heat of the sun, baking the earth until it cracked. In this harsh, sun-drenched environment, the wind carries the scent of dry dust and brittle leaves. A soft, dry rustle of sandy wind whistles through the rocky desert outcrops at twilight, smoothing out the footprints of the creatures that walk the dunes. The shadows stretch long and cool against the stone. Within these crevices, perfectly camouflaged against the ochre and gold canvas of the desert, rests a masterpiece of biological engineering. This is the African wildcat. Science names this phantom Felis sylvestris libica. It weighs between 8 to 12 pounds, a compact bundle of lean muscle and sinew wrapped in a sandy-coloured coat. The fur mimics the texture and shade of the sun-baked earth, allowing the creature to dissolve into the background the moment it stops moving. Distinct black bands mark its legs, breaking up its silhouette in the dappled light of the sparse brush. A black tip decorates the end of a long balancing tail, flicking with measured calculation as it observes the landscape. This animal represents the pinnacle of solitary hunting evolution. It requires no pack to survive. It relies on no alpha leader to track its prey. Every sense operates at maximum efficiency. The ears pivot like independent radar dishes, catching the faintest vibrations of life scurrying through the sand. The eyes capture the dying light of dusk, utilizing a mirror-like layer behind the retina to multiply the glow of the moon, turning the pitch-black night into a luminous hunting ground. It steps out from the cooling rocks, its padded paws making almost zero sound against the gravel. It's a ghost haunting the edges of the ancient world. Out of dozens of small cat species roaming the continents, only this specific desert spirit stepped out of the wilderness and walked into the light of human fires. The sheer perfection of its design means it never needed to change. It survived the shifting climates and the scarcity of prey by remaining a versatile opportunist. It hunted birds, rodents, lizards, and insects, sustaining its small frame on whatever the harsh landscape provided. It drank very little water, drawing moisture directly from the flesh of its kills. This independence makes the future alliance with humanity even more mysterious. Why trade the infinite horizon of the desert for the confined spaces of human settlements? The transition from the wild to the domestic didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, generational creep out of the darkness. Picture the relentless quiet of the desert at midnight. The sand holds the heat of the day, radiating warmth up into the belly of the wildcat as it waits in ambush. It waits for the precise moment a desert mouse makes a fatal error. The strike happens in a blur of motion, a silent leap followed by the fatal crunch of teeth against bone. The hunt ends before the prey even registers the attack. This level of lethality requires a nervous system wired for constant alertness. The feline brain processes every snapping twig and shifting shadow as a potential threat or a potential meal. Yet, as the wildcat consumes its catch under the vast canvas of the stars, the distant scent of roasting meat and burning wood drifts across the dunes. The humans are cooking. The humans are leaving scraps. The wildcat finishes its meal, grooms its whiskers to remove the evidence of the kill, and locks its gaze on the horizon. The journey from the rocky outcrops to the centre of our civilization begins with this solitary, sandy-coloured hunter deciding that the chaotic apes might just be useful. The natural world produces countless variations of predators, each tailored to a specific environment. The dense forests of the north hide the European wildcat, a creature of intense ferocity and territorial rage. The sprawling plains host the Asian wildcats, while the dunes conceal the hyper-specialised sandcats, and the dense wetlands provide cover for the jungle cats. These cousins of our desert phantom possess the same lethal anatomy, but their minds operate on a rigid frequency of hostility and isolation. If you capture a European wildcat as a kitten and raise it exclusively around humans, it won't ever surrender its untamable aggression. It fights the cage, it hisses at the hand that feeds it, and it views every moving object as an enemy to destroy or escape. The mind of the European wildcat remains locked behind a wall of pure panic and territorial defense. The sandcat thrives only in the most extreme isolation, its body so specialized for the deep desert that it can't adapt to the dampness or the crowd of human habitats. They're too rigid, too wired for solitary warfare to ever accept the proximity of another predator. Then we find the African wildcat, occupying a miraculous psychological middle ground. Libica lives a solitary life, patrolling its hunting grounds alone, but its boundaries remain flexible. The territories of these desert hunters often overlap. When two Libica wildcats cross paths near a watering hole or a dense patch of scrub concealing prey, the interaction doesn't automatically escalate into violence. Imagine a low, cautious hiss echoing across the rocks as two predators spot one another in the fading light. The sound vibrates with warning, their bodies tense, the fur along their spines standing tall to project size and threat. They lock eyes, reading the micro-expressions of muscle and posture, but the hiss slowly dissolves into silence. The tension breaks. They acknowledge each other. They assess the lack of immediate danger, and they choose to walk away. They tolerate the presence of others at a distance without launching into an automatic blind attack. This tolerance is the skeleton key to domestication. Survival doesn't always go to the strongest or the fastest. Sometimes the crown of evolution goes to the creature possessing the quiet capacity to simply endure the presence of another breathing entity. It's a genetic sweet spot. Libica can lower its guard just enough to avoid unnecessary conflict. When you observe a group of modern cats sharing a sunbeam on a living room floor, you are witnessing the legacy of this exact psychological trait. They ignore each other. They share space without requiring a hierarchy or a pack structure. This unique flexibility allowed the African wildcat to approach the edges of human camps without suffering a nervous breakdown. While the European wildcat would flee from the noise of shouting children and barking dogs, Libica sat at the edge of the firelight and watched. It didn't feel the burning urge to attack or run. It possessed the patience to sit in the shadows and analyze the chaos. The humans were loud, they smelled strange, and they moved with unpredictable clumsiness, but they also generated a tremendous amount of waste. Where there is human waste, there are scavengers, and where there are scavengers, the African wildcat finds an endless feast. The sweet spot in their temperament allowed them to bridge the gap between two completely different worlds, securing their place in the future while their aggressive cousins remain trapped in the past. The silence of the desert night amplifies the significance of this mental shift. A predator that can pause its aggression saves energy. It avoids the wounds and infections that come from constant territorial battles. This energy goes into hunting, surviving, and observing. The mind of Libica functions like an advanced calculation engine, constantly weighing the cost of a fight against the benefit of a meal. They don't waste their strength on pride. They don't demand total dominance over an area. If a human walks past, the wildcat merely flattens itself into the dust, letting the heavy footsteps pass before resuming its hunt. This passive observation builds the foundation for the greatest alliance in the history of the natural world. 12,000 years ago, the Earth spins into a new epoch, in the region we now call the Fertile Crescent, stretching from the warm waters of the Persian Gulf, through the river valleys of Iraq, across the plains of Syria and Lebanon, and down into the rich soils of Egypt. A radical transformation takes root. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans lived as nomads. Your ancestors followed the herds of wild game across the continents, migrating with the seasons, gathering wild berries, and leaving nothing behind but cold ashes and footprints. They moved like the wind, tethered to the natural cycles of the planet. But the climate warms, the ice retreats, and a new idea takes hold in the minds of humanity. They notice that seeds dropped on the damp soil sprout into edible plants. They smell the rich scent of rain hitting the dry earth and realize they can harness the power of growth. The wandering stops. The tribes build permanent structures of mud and stone, anchoring themselves to the land. They transition from hunters chasing the horizon into farmers cultivating the soil. They plant fields of wheat, barley, emmer, and einkorn, watching the green shoots break through the dirt and grow into golden waves of grain under the relentless sun. This transition creates the very first surplus of wealth in human history. They don't just eat what they kill today. They harvest thousands of seeds to ensure their survival through the cold, barren winters. Listen to the sound of this new era. A hypnotic, rhythmic grinding of heavy stone against stone fills the air of the early settlements. Women and men push heavy grinding rocks back and forth, crushing the harvested seeds into fine flour to bake bread. The friction of the stones echoes through the village, a slow, steady pulse of industry. They build massive silos and granaries to store the excess grain, piling the seeds high inside thick mud brick walls. These primitive vaults represent safety, civilization, and the future. The accumulation of grain meant humans no longer needed to move, allowing them to build walls, invent tools, and study the stars. They created pottery to hold water and wove baskets to carry the harvest. The foundations of cities emerged from the dirt. When humans stopped following their food, they changed the ecological map of the world. They gathered the scattered resources of the wild and concentrated them into one single location. They piled mountains of edible calories inside dark, quiet rooms, inadvertently creating a massive beacon for the rest of nature to follow. They built a paradise for scavengers. By hoarding food in one place, they invite competitors. The scent of the drying wheat travels on the wind, reaching the noses of creatures hidden in the grass and beneath the soil. The granaries radiate warmth, offering shelter from the harsh winter frost. The humans sleep soundly in their mud brick homes, listening to the crackle of the hearth fire, unaware that their treasure attracts a silent army. They planted the seeds of modern civilization, but they didn't anticipate the consequences of their success. The stone continues to grind against stone, a steady beat of progress, masking the quiet approach of a new threat gathering just outside the walls. The massive concentrations of grain inside the human settlements alter the natural balance of the surrounding wilderness. The scent of stored wheat acts as an irresistible siren song. From the fields, the forests, and the scrublands, an army converges on the villages. House mice, rats, and voles abandon their scattered burrows and migrate toward the artificial mountains of food. The archaeological fossil record from this period shows a sudden, violent explosion of rodent bones buried in the layers of ancient earth. They multiply at a terrifying speed. The dark corners of the granaries come alive. You stand in the center of the storage room, the air thick with the smell of dry dust and raw flour. Around you, the walls seem to vibrate. The frantic, ultrasonic squeaking and scratching of thousands of unseen mice echo inside the mud brick walls. It's a continuous, creeping rustle. Tiny claws scrape against the clay pots, sharp teeth chew through the woven baskets, and millions of jaws devour the hard-earned harvest. The grain shifts and slides as the rats burrow deep into the piles, creating a labyrinth of tunnels within the food supply. The humans face an invisible, unstoppable tide. This isn't merely a nuisance. This is a matter of life and death. The rodents don't just eat the seeds, they contaminate the grain with their waste, spoiling the flour and introducing deadly diseases to the dense human populations. A plague of rats can wipe out a settlement's entire winter supply in a matter of weeks, guaranteeing starvation when the frost arrives. The humans try to fight back. They build elevated platforms, they set primitive traps, and they try to seal the cracks in the walls with mud and stones. It doesn't work. The biological mathematics of rodent reproduction outpace any human defense. A single pair of mice can produce hundreds of offspring in a matter of months. The early farmers turn to their oldest animal ally. They unleash the dogs. But the canine hunters fail. Dogs are too large, too clumsy, and too easily distracted by the sights and smells of the village. A dog barks, thumping its heavy paws against the floor, warning the mice long before it ever gets close. A dog can't squeeze behind the grain sacks or navigate the narrow crevices of the mud walls. The humans created an artificial ecosystem so dense with tiny, fast-moving prey that traditional hunting methods prove useless. The crisis demands a very specific type of executioner. The village requires a specialist equipped with lightning-fast reflexes, the ability to see in total darkness, and hearing acute enough to pinpoint the exact location of a mouse scratching behind a solid wall. The defender must move without making a sound, strike without hesitation, and possess the patience to wait hours for a single opening. The humans don't realize it, but they have perfectly replicated the hunting grounds of the desert phantom. By concentrating the rodent population into a confined space, the humans warped the natural behavior of the ecosystem. The granaries transform into an endless, all-you-can-eat buffet for any predator bold enough to walk past the human campfires. Imagine the creeping dread of the early farmers as they inspect the storage silos at dawn. They pull away the woven covers to find the grain husks scattered across the floor, the precious seeds hollowed out and ruined. The survival of their families balances on the edge of a blade, threatened by an enemy they can't even catch. The ecosystem provides the answer, drawing the perfect countermeasure out of the rocky scrublands. The scent of the concentrated prey drifts outward, reaching the sensitive nose of Felis sylvestris libica. The wildcat tracks the smell, following the invisible trail of rodents leading directly into the heart of the noisy, dangerous human village. Nature operates through invisible variations. Within any population of wild animals, temperaments fluctuate. Some African wildcats possess a nervous system wired for extreme caution, their brains flooded with fear at the slightest unnatural noise. These highly fearful cats stay 200 meters away from the human settlements, keeping to the rocks and the brush, hunting the sparse desert mice scattered across the dunes. They survive, but their lives remain hard, defined by long hunts and empty stomachs. They won't risk the danger of the two-legged apes, but biology always offers a spectrum. A few wildcats inherit a slightly different chemical balance. Their fear response runs just a fraction lower. These slightly less fearful cats dare to approach within 50 meters of the mud brick walls. They creep into the trash piles, they slip into the shadows of the grain silos, and they discover the massive infestation of rodents. They hit the jackpot. The proximity to the humans means an endless supply of mice, which translates into a massive surplus of calories. Step into the mind of this slightly brave wildcat. The shadows of the village offer perfect cover. The cat flattens its body against the cool earth, its eyes tracking the movement of a fat house rat chewing on a dropped kernel of barley. The cat doesn't think about the human sleeping just a few feet away. It focuses entirely on the prey. The muscles coil like a tension spring. The leap happens in absolute silence. A satisfying wet crunch of a successful hunt echoes in the shadows, perfectly hidden from human eyes. The cat secures a massive meal without walking miles across the desert. It eats its fill, retreats to a quiet roof to groom, and sleeps with a full belly. This access to high-calorie food changes the evolutionary trajectory of the species. The cats that tolerate the human presence survive longer. They don't starve during the harsh winters. Because they eat better, they breed more successfully. They produce litters of strong, healthy kittens in the quiet spaces under the floorboards or high in the rafters. And crucially, they pass down the less fearful gene to the next generation. The kittens grow up surrounded by the sounds of human voices, the smell of wood smoke, and the rhythmic grinding of the stone mills. They learn that the apes aren't a threat. They are merely loud, clumsy neighbours who accidentally farm rodents. This process creates a pure self-domestication loop. Humans play no active role in this breeding program. We don't trap the cats, we don't select the mates, and we don't guide the genetics. The felines engage in pure self-selection over hundreds of generations. The bravest cats get the most food, have the most babies, and create a new lineage of animals naturally inclined to tolerate our society. Contrast this with canine domestication, where humans stole wolf pups from their dens, killed the aggressive ones, and bred the submissive ones to create tools. The human hand physically shaped the dog. The cat, however, shaped itself. They didn't surrender to us. They never waved a white flag or offered their loyalty in exchange for scraps. They merely calculated the mathematics of survival and realized that the shadow of human civilization offered the most profitable hunting ground on Earth. They hacked our agricultural system. As the generations turn, the 50-meter boundary shrinks to 20 meters, then 10 meters, until finally a cat walks directly into the light of the fire, sits down, and waits for a mouse to run across the floor. The humans watch this silent assassin work. They don't chase the cat away. A silent pact forms in the dark, an unspoken agreement based completely on mutual benefit. We provide the rodents, and they provide the execution. The feral ghost becomes a willing resident. The proof of this ancient alliance doesn't just live in theory, it remains buried in the soil waiting for the modern world to uncover the truth. Fast forward from the ancient dawn to the Mediterranean sun of the 1990s, in a village called Chilorakambos on the island of Cyprus, a team of researchers digs through the dust of history. Listen to the delicate, breathy scraping of a modern archaeologist's trowel, brushing dry dirt away from small, fragile bones. The metal tool gently moves the earth, revealing a secret that completely rewrites the timeline of human and feline friendship. They uncover a 9,500-year-old grave. Inside this ancient pit lies the skeleton of a human, resting in the eternal dark. But the human doesn't sleep alone. Placed carefully right beside the person, separated by only a few inches of dirt, lies the complete uncrushed skeleton of an 8-month-old cat. The bones show no signs of butchery or violence. The animal wasn't a meal, and it wasn't a random casualty of nature. The placement reveals clear, deliberate intention. Someone loved this animal enough to lay it to rest beside its human companion. This discovery shatters the old assumptions. For decades, historians believed the ancient Egyptians invented the concept of the pet cat around 4,000 years ago. The Cyprus grave pushes the timeline back by over 5 millennia. But the location of the grave offers an even more staggering revelation. The island of Cyprus was never connected to the mainland. No land bridge ever existed to allow wildcats to wander over from the scrublands of the Near East. The Mediterranean Sea formed a massive, impassable barrier of deep blue water. A wild animal doesn't accidentally wander onto a hollowed-out log and drift across the sea to an island. The cats had to be intentionally transported by human hands. Imagine the ancient mariners loading their small, precarious boats with supplies for the dangerous journey across the waves. They brought tools, seeds, and families, and they specifically chose to bring the cats. They carried these small predators across the ocean as deliberate, cherished cargo. They protected them from the sea spray and the terrifying roll of the waves, securing their safety all the way to a new, foreign shore. Think about the profound meaning locked inside this grave. What does it mean that our ancestors loved an animal so deeply that they carried it across the violent sea just to ensure it walked beside them in a new land? It shows that the relationship had evolved far beyond mere pest control. The hunter of the granary became a companion of the soul. The human and the cat shared the warmth of the fire in life, and the tribe decided they should share eternity in the soil. The trowel continues to brush away the dust, exposing the undeniable proof that thousands of years before the pharaohs built the pyramids, a human being looked at a cat, saw a friend, and couldn't bear to leave it behind. From the shores of Cyprus and the valleys of the Fertile Crescent, humanity begins to march outward. The invention of farming triggers a massive explosion in human population. The tribes become towns, and the towns grow into sprawling city-states. By 7,000 years ago, the remains of cats start appearing in the archaeological layers across the Mediterranean and deep into the forests of Europe. Trace the slow, marching footprint of humanity spreading across the ancient maps, and you will see tiny feline paw prints shadowing every single step. They follow the exact routes of agricultural expansion, moving like a soft, purring shadow behind the heavy blades of the ploughs. Every time a new village forms, the humans clear the land, plant the wheat, and build the storage houses. Listen to the heavy, muffled thud of rough-woven grain sacks being stacked in a dark storeroom. That sound represents the lifeblood of the growing empires. But every new storeroom rings the dinner bell for the local rodent populations. The rats adapt just as quickly as the humans, swarming the new territories. The farmers realize they can't survive the frontier without their tiny, sharp-toothed guardians. The cats become an essential piece of biological infrastructure. We look back at history and credit our massive human brains for the creation of civilization. We praise the genius of our ancestors who invented the wheel, forged bronze swords, and built monumental temples reaching toward the sky. We celebrate the scribes who developed writing to record the laws of kings, the mathematicians who calculated the geometry of the fields, and the astronomers who mapped the movement of the stars. But we forget the dark, brutal mathematics of survival. None of those specialized professions can exist if a society spends all its time hunting for food. Civilization requires surplus. A society can only afford to feed a philosopher, a soldier, or a priest if the farmer produces more food than he consumes, and if that extra food survives the winter in the granary. If the rats eat the surplus, the society starves. The specialization of labor collapses. The astronomers must drop their charts and pick up spears to hunt for meat. The invisible infrastructure of feline rodent control literally held up the pillars of human progress. They patrolled the dark alleys of the early cities, slaughtered the mice threatening the silos, and protected the wealth that funded human innovation. We built our majestic empires of stone and knowledge on the backs of a 9-pound exterminator. They guarded the fuel that powered human evolution, demanding nothing in return but a warm place to sleep and the freedom to hunt in the shadows. The steady thud of the grain sacks continues as the silos fill to the brim. The human workers wipe the sweat from their brows and lock the heavy wooden doors, trusting the harvest to the night shift. The cats slide out from beneath the floorboards, their eyes adjusting to the dark. They take up their posts, a biological army standing between human ambition and total ecological collapse. To understand the true magic of this animal, we must leave the dusty archaeological digs and enter the microscopic universe of modern science. In the year 2007, geneticists successfully sequenced the entire domestic cat genome. They mapped the vast, spiraling ladders of DNA that dictate the shape, the behavior, and the biological destiny of the feline. They took this intricate genetic map and laid it side by side with the DNA of the ancient African wildcat, searching for the massive mutations that surely must exist between a wild beast and a purring house pet. What they found shocked the scientific community. Close your eyes and enter the invisible world of biology, floating through the glowing, twisting chains of the double helix. You search for the dramatic alterations, the heavy-handed rewiring that usually accompanies domestication. Instead, you find almost total stillness. Out of roughly 20,000 functional genes making up the feline genetic code, only about 13 key genes show significant changes. The domestic cat differs from its fierce, wild ancestor by less than 1/10 of 1%. It's an almost terrifying lack of mutation. Think of the staggering biological changes humans inflicted on other animals. We took the towering grey wolf and warped its genetic structure so brutally that it shattered into hundreds of bizarre, unrecognisable shapes. We created pugs that struggle to breathe, dachshunds with elongated spines that scrape the earth, and giant mastiffs that weigh more than a full-grown man. We twisted the wild boar into the domestic pig, altering its shape, its fat content, and its natural instincts. We transformed the athletic, terrifying aurochs into docile, slow-moving dairy cows that can't survive without human milking. We use selective breeding like a massive blunt hammer, smashing the original designs of nature into convenient tools. The cat escaped this genetic butchery. Their DNA acts like an enormous, complex vault lock, tightly guarded and perfectly constructed. Hear the heavy metallic tumblers falling into place, a massive lock clicking open with the subtle turn of one microscopic key. Evolution didn't use a hammer on the cat, it used a surgical scalpel. The body plan remained completely untouched. Your cat retains the exact same bone structure, the identical lethal jaw mechanics, and the fast-twitch muscle fibers that allow a wildcat to leap 6 feet into the air from a standing position. They kept their obligate carnivore status, meaning their internal organs still demand pure meat to survive, completely unable to process a plant-based diet like a dog or a pig. They kept the wild entirely intact. Why change the physical shell when the physical shell already represents peak predatory perfection? The wildcat's body was a flawless machine, capable of leaping, climbing, sprinting, and killing with maximum efficiency. Changing the shape would only dull the weapon. The humans didn't need a different shape. They needed the exact same hunter, just with a slightly different attitude. So, the genetic shifts ignored the bones, the fur, and the muscles, and went straight for the invisible control center. The microscopic key turned in the lock, shifting a few tiny strands of DNA deep within the brain chemistry. Evolution left the lethal assassin intact, but it rewired the assassin's motivation. Your house cat is a walking paradox, an animal possessing the exact physical machinery of a ruthless killer, draped in a chemical disguise that allows it to sleep belly up on your sofa. This staggeringly small genetic difference means that every domestic cat lives right on the razor's edge of the wild. If you release a domestic dog into the forest, it struggles to survive. But if a domestic cat slips out the door and returns to the brush, it instantly remembers how to be a ghost. If the body remained the same, what exactly did those 13 microscopic genetic keys unlock? They pick the locks of the feline brain, altering the subtle chemical flow that governs fear, memory, and pleasure. The wildcat's brain operates as an alarm system, constantly scanning the horizon for danger. A massive section of this alarm system lives in the amygdala, the primitive part of the brain responsible for processing fear. Wild animals suffer from intense neophobia, an overwhelming terror of anything new. A strange sound, an unfamiliar shadow, or a sudden movement triggers an explosive release of adrenaline, forcing the animal to fight or flee. The genetic tweak turned the volume knob down on the amygdala. The domestic cat's brain dampens the fear response. When a shadow moves across the floor, or a loud human voice echoes in the room, the alarm still rings, but it rings softly. The terror fades, leaving behind a powerful sense of curiosity. The instinct to run dissolves into an urge to investigate. Focus on the deep, steady, calming heartbeat of a newborn kitten, resting in the palm of a human hand. The pulse slows down. The tiny lungs take deep, even breaths. The chemical pathways in the brain analyze the scent of the human skin, process the gentle warmth of the fingers, and make a revolutionary decision. This isn't a predator. This is safe. The fear vanishes, replaced by a quiet acceptance. Beyond the dampening of terror, the genetics rewired the pleasure centers. The ancient wildcats hunted purely for fresh kills, their brains rewarding them only for the violent capture of live prey. The new genetic code altered the dopamine pathways. Dopamine is the chemical of reward, the rush of satisfaction that tells the brain an action was successful. The domestic cat started receiving dopamine hits not just from hunting, but from scavenging. They learned to feel satisfaction from eating the scraps left behind by human meals. This massive shift in motivation allowed them to adapt their diet. They didn't have to burn energy chasing mice every single night. They could wait for a human to drop a piece of fish or a chunk of roasted meat, and their brains would reward them just the same. This flexibility chained them to our kitchens. Finally, the genetic key unlocked the timeline of their minds. In the wild, a kitten's brain hardens quickly. They have only a few short weeks of neural plasticity, a brief window where they can learn new social skills before their minds lock into the rigid, solitary instincts of an adult hunter. The domestication process stretched this window of childhood. The neural plasticity of the domestic cat extends far into their juvenile period. They remain mentally flexible for months, allowing them to learn the complex social cues of human households. They learn to interpret the tone of our voices, they memorize the daily routines of the house, and they figure out exactly which pitch of a meow will force a human to open a door or fill a bowl. They retain a childlike mental state, treating the giant humans towering over them as permanent surrogate mothers. They knead their paws against your blankets, a physical echo of a nursing kitten asking for milk. These 3 specific chemical tweaks created a masterpiece of behavioral engineering. They walk through your house possessing the lethal hardware of the desert, but their software runs on a program of perpetual calculating affection. They love us because their altered chemistry allows them to, but they watch us with the unblinking eyes of an ancient killer. The rapid, frantic pulse of the wild slows down to match the rhythm of domestic life. The brain chemistry assures the animal that the giant apes won't attack. This invisible neurological bridge allows 2 completely distinct species to occupy the exact same territory in total peace. As the internal chemistry of the feline brain shifts away from pure fear and toward tolerance, a strange and beautiful physical transformation begins to manifest on the outside. For thousands of years, the cats wandering the alleys of early settlements wore the exact same sandy camouflaged coats as their wild ancestors in the desert. They needed to blend into the rocks and the dry grass to survive. But around 5,000 years ago, the uniform gold and brown canvas shatters. The invisible world of genetics suddenly bursts into the visible spectrum. Coat colours begin to appear, bright orange tabbies, deep black shadows, and felines splashed with random white patches walk out of the dark and into the sun. This explosion of colour isn't an accident. It links directly to a fascinating scientific concept known as the domestication syndrome. Biologists studying the genetic domestication of animals discovered a hidden biological rule. The genes that control the dampening of the fear response are physically linked to the genes that dictate pigmentation. When you select for a docile, friendly temperament, the biological machinery that produces adrenaline and neural crest cells changes. This alteration accidentally disrupts the distribution of pigment in the animal's fur. Tameness literally drags colour along for the ride as a biological hitchhiker. Watch the soft, wet brushstrokes of an ancient Egyptian artist kneeling on the stone floor of a temple. He holds a thin reed brush, dipping it into a bowl of vibrant crushed ochre. With delicate, sweeping motions, he paints the image of a bright orange tabby cat onto a crisp sheet of papyrus. By 3,000 years ago, Egyptian artwork no longer depicts just the sandy wildcats of the past. The murals and scrolls overflow with multicoloured felines resting under chairs, hunting birds in the marshes and wearing jewelled collars. The art reflects the changing reality of the streets. The cats gave up their camouflage because they no longer needed to hide from the apex predators of the world. The humans became their shield. This emergence of distinct colours and patterns altered the psychological relationship between the humans and the cats. When every cat looked exactly like a uniform wild beast, they were viewed as a collective workforce, an army of identical exterminators. But when a cat is born with a unique splash of white across its nose, or a distinct black pattern resembling a mask, it stops being a generic animal. Colour was the universe's way of marking the cats as distinct individuals. The patterns gave them visual identities. This individuality allowed humans to pick them out of a crowd. It allowed a child to recognise their specific feline friend waiting by the door. It allowed families to give them specific names, to form deep emotional attachments to a single creature, and to grieve terribly when that specific patchwork of fur finally passed away. The genetic hitchhiker of colour turned the wild worker into a permanent, irreplaceable member of the family. We travel down the winding, life-giving waters of the Nile, Around 2,900 years before the Common Era, the Egyptian civilization begins to explode in size and ambition. The annual flooding of the river deposits rich, black silt along the banks, turning the valley into the most productive agricultural engine the ancient world has ever seen. The early dynasties harnessed this power, planting endless fields of wheat and barley under the baking desert sun. They construct monumental architecture, pushing massive blocks of stone into the sky to create the first great cities. But with massive production comes massive vulnerability. The Egyptians build vast, echoing silos, enormous stone granaries designed to hold the wealth of the kingdom. Walk into one of these massive structures. The air feels cool and heavy, smelling of dry dust and roasted earth. The vast, echoing silence of the enormous stone granary presses against your ears, creating a sense of awe. But this silence is fragile. Without protection, these mountains of food attract a nightmare. Thousands of rodents breed in the shadows, threatening early dynastic Egypt with total starvation. A plague of rats capable of wiping out a city's entire food supply gathers in the dark, preparing to chew through the foundations of the empire. The silence shatters. A lightning-fast swish of air cuts through the dark as a cat leaps across the grain pile. The hunter lands with a soft thud, its claws sinking into the target, neutralizing the threat instantly. The cats of the Nile Valley form a literal living barrier between human civilization and absolute collapse. They patrol the storehouses every night, a silent army defending the bread that feeds the laborers, the soldiers, and the pharaohs. The mathematics of survival in ancient Egypt were brutally simple. No cats meant no grain meant no bread. No bread meant the laborers starved, the army collapsed, and the empire dissolved back into the blowing sands. When an animal stands directly between your family and the horrors of starvation, the human mind struggles to process the magnitude of the debt. A pragmatic alliance slowly mutates. The farmers watch the small predators emerging from the granaries at dawn, wiping the blood from their whiskers, having saved the village yet again. Gratitude is a powerful emotion, but when it mixes with the mystery of an animal that hunts in the pitch-black night, gratitude inevitably mutates into something much deeper and much more profound. The Egyptians didn't just respect the cats for their work, they began to view their physical perfection, their glowing eyes, and their deadly efficiency as something entirely unnatural. They looked at the exterminator and started to see the divine. The pragmatic relationship forged in the dirt and the grain begins to ascend toward the heavens, preparing to cross the boundary from utility into pure worship. By the time the Middle Kingdom rises around 2,000 years before the Common Era, the cat steps out of the granary and walks directly into the sacred temples. They appear in the religious texts and the mythological artwork, elevated from mortal hunters to spiritual guardians. The ancient Egyptians worshipped a fierce deity named Bastet. For centuries, Bastet held the form of a terrifying, bloodthirsty lioness, representing the brutal, unforgiving violence of the sun and the desert. But as the domestic cat became intimately woven into the daily survival and emotional life of the people, the goddess herself transforms. Bastet sheds the massive, terrifying form of the lioness and takes on the shape of a woman with the head of a domestic cat. She shifts from a symbol of savage wrath into the goddess of home protection, fertility, music, and joy. This theological shift marks a staggering cultural milestone. The terrifying apex predator of the wild shrinks down to become the beloved protector of the hearth. By 1,500 years before the Common Era, during the heights of the New Kingdom, the city of Bubastis emerges as the absolute centre of her cult. This city becomes a sprawling, wealthy metropolis entirely dedicated to the veneration of the feline. Imagine standing on the banks of the Nile as the sun sets over the water, turning the river into a ribbon of liquid gold. You hear it drifting on the evening breeze, the distant rhythmic metallic chiming of sistrums, the sacred rattles used by the priests shakes through the warm air. The chiming blends seamlessly with the joyous chanting of hundreds of thousands of voices echoing across the water. The Greek historian Herodotus visited this city around 450 years before the Common Era, and he recorded a sight that boggles the modern mind. He described the annual festival of Bastet as the greatest and most enthusiastic celebration in all of Egypt. Massive barges floated down the Nile, packed with men and women singing, playing flutes and clapping their hands. When they arrived at Bubastis, the celebrations exploded into ecstatic feasts of wine and dancing. Herodotus claimed that over 700,000 pilgrims gathered for this single festival. 700,000 humans, travelling across the harsh ancient world, drinking more wine in a few days than they did the entire rest of the year, all gathered to worship the spirit of the cat. Create the hypnotic atmosphere of this ancient party in your mind. The smell of roasting meats and thick, sweet incense fills the city streets. The music vibrates through the soles of your feet. The society dances in a frenzy of joy, honouring the small animal that sleeps in their homes. They didn't just worship the cats because they were cute. They elevated them because they recognised the profound, beautiful duality of nature living inside the animal. Bastet represented the gentle, nurturing mother who lovingly cares for her kittens, but who also possesses the lethal capacity to instantly switch into a ruthless, merciless killer to protect her family from a venomous snake or a diseased rat. The Egyptians understood this duality perfectly. They saw that true protection requires both profound love and the capacity for total violence. They bowed down to the feline because the feline mastered this balance. But human devotion always casts a dark, complicated shadow. The reverence for the cat in ancient Egypt reached extremes that border on the fanatical. The law of the land dictated absolute protection for the living animal. If a citizen killed a cat, even purely by accident, the crowd often exacted immediate brutal justice. The punishment for the crime was death. When a beloved family cat passed away from old age, the entire household plunged into deep formal mourning. The family members would shave off their own eyebrows to visually display their grief to the world, crying out in sorrow for the loss of the feline spirit. They treated the death of a cat with the same heavy solemnity as the death of a human child. Yet beneath this intense love, a massive and grim industrial complex operated out of sight. In the late 1800s, European archaeologists digging near Bubastis and Saqqara broke through the limestone floors of the desert and uncovered vast underground galleries, plunge into the cool, dark, incense-heavy air of these subterranean catacombs. The torches illuminate millions upon millions of mummified cats stacked from floor to ceiling. They rest inside intricate bronze statues and small wooden coffins, perfectly preserved in the dry air. Listen to the tight, deliberate stretching and wrapping of coarse linen strips around a small, fragile body. The embalmers worked with terrifying efficiency, preparing endless rows of feline vessels for the afterlife. Modern science scanned these mummies and discovered a profoundly disturbing truth. Many of these cats didn't die of old age. The temples operated massive industrial catteries, breeding thousands of kittens specifically to fulfill the religious demands of the pilgrims. Visitors arriving at the festival of Bastet wanted to offer a gift to the goddess, so they purchased a cat from the priests. The priests would then ceremonially kill the young animal, mummify it, and place it in the catacombs on behalf of the pilgrim. This is the tragic paradox of the mummy economy. The law demanded the death penalty for anyone who harmed a cat on the street, but the religious institutions bred and slaughtered them by the millions in the name of the divine. Human love is a profoundly dangerous thing. We elevate the creatures we cherish. We build monuments to their grace, but we often destroy them in the process of making them sacred. We turn the living, breathing animal into a symbol, and in our desperate attempt to purchase favour from the gods, we blind ourselves to the hypocrisy of our own actions. The millions of wrapped bodies resting in the dark serve as a haunting reminder of the extremes of human obsession, a monument to a society that loved the cat so much it industrialized its death. The immense value placed on the cat by the Egyptian Empire eventually morphed into strict cultural protectionism. Between the years 1000 and 500 before the Common Era, the pharaohs realized that their living treasures were slowly leaking out of the kingdom. Foreign merchants visiting the bustling ports of Alexandria and Memphis saw the incredible utility of these silent rat killers and wanted them for their own cities. In response, Egypt instituted an absolute export ban. It became highly illegal to take a cat out of the empire. The government even funded specialized repatriation agents, ancient squads of detectives sent out into foreign lands with bags of gold to buy back or steal stolen felines and return them to the safety of the Nile. But you can't build a wall high enough to contain an idea whose time has come. The demand for pest control across the Mediterranean was simply too vast. Shift your mind away from the dusty temples and out onto the rolling, dangerous waters of the ancient sea. We enter a world of high-stakes, covert espionage. Focus on the tense, muffled creak of a rough wooden smuggler's crate, hidden deep within the pitch-black hold of a swaying Phoenician trading ship. The vessel pitches over the waves, carrying stolen cargo away from the watchful eyes of the Egyptian harbour guards. Greek merchants and Phoenician sailors routinely broke the pharaoh's laws, hiding cats in woven baskets beneath piles of amphorae and sailing them across the sea to the markets of Athens and Rome. As the cats arrive on the shores of the rising Roman Republic, they encounter a culture with a drastically different worldview. The Romans don't care about Bastet. They don't worship the animal or shave their eyebrows in mourning. Roman writers like Pliny the Elder and Plutarch observe the cat with cold, pragmatic logic, writing about their hunting skills without a single drop of mysticism. To the Roman mind, the cat is a biological tool, a highly efficient machine designed to protect the true lifeblood of the empire, the military grain supply. The Roman legions march across Europe, conquering Gaul, Britain and Germania. A marching army requires thousands of tons of wheat to survive. The Romans quickly realize that their massive supply chains are incredibly vulnerable to rodent infestations. To secure the logistics of their endless wars, the Romans deploy the cats alongside the soldiers. The felines march with the legions, guarding the massive storehouses in the freezing rain of ancient Britain and the dense, dark forests of the German frontier. They trade the baking heat of the desert for the harsh, wet reality of European conquest. Despite the Roman lack of religious reverence, the sheer power of the cat's cultural aura still lingered in the minds of the people they conquered. The Greek historian Diodorus Siculus tells a terrifying story of a Roman soldier stationed in Egypt who accidentally killed a local cat. The furious Egyptian mob dragged him into the street and tore him apart, ignoring the pleas of their own king. The power of the empire couldn't save a man who harmed the sacred hunter. The story of this animal doesn't end on the shores of the Mediterranean. It moves eastward, carried on the backs of beasts of burden across the vast, unforgiving expanse of the ancient world. Trace the overland trade routes winding through the mountains of Persia and stretching across the harsh plains of Central Asia. This is the Silk Road, a sprawling network of dirt and stone connecting the empires of the West to the dynasties of the East. The journey takes months of relentless walking under a burning sun and freezing stars. Focus your mind on the gentle, hypnotic jingling of small brass camel bells cutting through the thin air of a cold desert night. The rhythmic chime sways back and forth, marking the slow, steady progress of the caravan. The breath of the pack animals forms clouds of white mist in the freezing dark. Men sit huddled around small scrub fires, trading spices, bolts of shimmering fabric and blocks of raw salt. But hidden within the woven baskets secured against the rocking motion of the saddles rests a quiet traveller. The cats watch the eastern horizon approach, their eyes adjusting to landscapes their ancestors never could have imagined. By the 1st century of the Common Era, writers in the Chinese courts begin to document the arrival of these strange foreign hunters. They describe them as exotic Western imports, prized gifts brought by weary merchants seeking favour with local lords. The pragmatic rat-catcher of the desert encounters a society steeped in complex spiritual reflection. The transition from pure utility to cultural integration takes centuries, but it reaches a peak during the golden age of the Tang dynasty around the year 700. The felines spread from the dusty trade routes into the damp green bamboo forests and the paper-walled homes of the eastern cities. They find a unique place within the emerging philosophies of the region. The spread of Buddhism, with its core tenets of non-violence and reverence for all living creatures, provides a blanket of protection for the animals. The monks allow the cats to patrol the quiet halls of the temples, guarding the sacred hand-painted scrolls from the destruction of mice. The philosophy of Taoism, which values naturalness, spontaneity, and flowing with the current of the universe, looks at the cat and sees a living embodiment of the path. A cat doesn't force its will upon the world. It rests when tired, it hunts when hungry, and it moves with liquid grace. The creature born in the brutal heat of the African scrublands transforms into a serene symbol of balance, thousands of miles away from its ancient home. The web of human travel stretches even further, pushing the boundaries of endurance and survival. In the 6th century of the Common Era, the cats cross the ocean to reach the islands of Imperial Japan. They arrive as rare, priceless treasures, gifted exclusively to the emperor and kept behind the high walls of the palaces by the wealthy elite. Picture the quiet, delicate atmosphere of the Kyoto courts, where poets write verses on rice paper and the scent of plum blossoms fills the air. The cats rest on cushions of woven silk, revered for their beauty and their silent, dignified presence. They become aristocratic companions, shielded from the harsh realities of the outside world. But while the cats of the East lounge in quiet gardens, a completely different reality unfolds in the freezing waters of the north. Between the years 800 and 1000, the brutal seafaring warriors of Scandinavia begin their relentless expansion. The Vikings launch their narrow wooden longships into the terrifying grey waters of the northern seas. They navigate through towering waves and crushing ice, pushing outward to conquer and settle the harsh landscapes of Iceland, Greenland, Dublin, and Kiev. They build societies based on raid, trade, and survival in the most unforgiving climates on the planet. Listen to the violent, splintering crack of sea ice scraping against the rough wooden hull of a Viking ship. The sound reverberates through the freezing fog. Below the deck, hidden among the barrels of salted fish and iron weapons, the descendants of the desert phantom brace against the roll of the ocean. The Vikings understand the cold mathematics of winter survival. If rats destroy their food stores during the long months of darkness, the entire settlement perishes. The cats become indispensable crewmen on these blood-stained voyages, earning their place by guarding the harvest. The felines stepping onto the shores of Iceland and the snowy forests of the north face an environment that should have killed them. But the biological flexibility of the species shines through the frost. Over the generations, the cats adapting to the Nordic cold develop thicker, denser coats of fur to trap their body heat. They grow larger, building layers of fat and muscle to survive the plunging temperatures. Modern DNA analysis of feline populations across Europe traces specific genetic markers straight back to the roots of the Viking expansion. From the delicate silk pillows of the Japanese emperor to the ash-covered hearths of the freezing north, the cat molds itself to the desires of entirely different human worlds, proving its status as the ultimate survivor. The long alliance between humanity and the feline faces a brutal fracture. The shadow falls across Europe during the 12th and 13th centuries. The continent descends into an era defined by fear, plague, and religious paranoia. The church consolidates its power over the minds of the people, demanding absolute obedience and interpreting the mysteries of the natural world through the strict lens of divine warfare. The sprawling forests and the dark, twisting alleys of the medieval cities become stages for a grand, terrifying drama between good and evil. In this atmosphere of dread, the unique biological traits of the cat mutate from admired skills into evidence of demonic possession. Imagine a solitary church bell tolling slowly through a thick, damp fog in a fearful European village. The iron rings out, calling the faithful to prayer, warning them of the dangers lurking in the shadows. The villagers lock their wooden doors, staring out into the night with suspicion. The cat is an animal of the dark. It thrives when the sun disappears. It moves without making a sound, slipping over cobblestones and thatched roofs with unnatural silence. To a superstitious mind, an animal that walks like a ghost must hold a connection to the underworld. The anatomy of the feline eye sparks intense terror. When a stray beam of moonlight catches a cat hunting in the alley, its eyes flash with a brilliant glowing fire. This happens because of a reflective layer of tissue behind the retina, designed to capture trace amounts of light. But the medieval peasant doesn't understand biology. They see two floating orbs of gold burning in the pitch-black fog, and they assume they are looking at the gaze of a demon. The sounds of the animals only fuel the panic. When cats fight over territory or signal for a mate, they emit a chilling, human-sounding scream that echoes across the rooftops, sounding like a child in pain or a witch casting a curse. The very traits that made them the perfect protectors of the ancient Egyptian granaries turn them into targets. Their independence, once respected by the Romans, now looks like stubborn defiance to a culture that demands total submission. They won't learn tricks, they won't pull carts, and they refuse to follow commands. The medieval mind looks at this solitary, glowing-eyed hunter and decides it doesn't belong to the natural order. The truce forged in the desert begins to crack under the weight of human ignorance. The villagers start to whisper, pointing fingers at the old women who feed the strays, drawing a line of suspicion that will soon erupt into unimaginable violence. The whispers of suspicion solidify into the law of the land in the year 1233. Pope Gregory IX issues an official papal decree known as the Vox in Rama, This document serves as the first official church text to directly link the presence of cats, particularly black ones, to the practices of devil worship and heretical cults. The decree claims that these animals act as familiars, dark spirits taking physical form to assist witches in their dark magic. The ink dries on the parchment, and a wave of hysteria washes across the continent. The church legitimizes the fear, giving the terrified masses permission to destroy the shadows they don't understand. The tragedy that follows stains the history of the continent. For centuries, across the towns and villages of Europe, humans turn against their oldest companion with ruthless, systematic violence. The millions of animals that guarded the grain and controlled the disease are suddenly hunted down. Focus your senses on the terrifying roar and crackle of a massive festival bonfire burning in the center of a stone plaza. The flames lick the sky, throwing dancing shadows against the walls of the cathedral. The heat of the fire pushes against your face. Below the roar of the flames, a heartbreaking sound echoes through the smoke. The panicked scratching of claws on rough cobblestone rings out as the animals try to escape the mobs. The citizens gather on feast days to burn the cats in barrels, drown them in the rivers, and throw them from the high towers of the cities. They celebrate the slaughter, believing they are cleansing their communities of evil. It becomes a twisted carnival of destruction. If an old woman living on the edge of the village keeps a cat for company, she risks being dragged to the fire alongside her animal, accused of witchcraft. The circular logic of the witch trials ensures that anyone who shows compassion to the creature must also be aligned with the devil. The population of felines across Europe plummets, their numbers decimated by the continuous institutionalized panic. You feel a profound sense of sorrow as you observe this era of darkness. The animals don't understand the sudden shift in human behavior. They still try to seek warmth near the hearths. They still try to hunt the mice chewing through the floorboards. But the hands that once offered scraps of fish now hold torches and stones. Fear acts as a potent poison in the human mind. It blinds us to reality, twisting our perception until we lash out and destroy the very things that quietly keep us safe. The bonfires burn late into the night, turning the protectors into ash and setting the stage for a biological catastrophe of unprecedented scale. Nature possesses a brutal, unforgiving sense of irony. It functions as an intricate web of balances, and when humans sever a crucial thread, the entire system collapses. By the year 1347, the feline population of Europe remains a fraction of its former size, driven out of the cities and hunted to the brink. The dark alleys and the overflowing storehouses stand empty of their silent guardians. The humans pat themselves on the back, believing they have driven out the darkness. But the true darkness arrives in the bellies of the trading ships docking in the ports of Italy. The bubonic plague sweeps onto the shores of the continent. Listen to the hollow, eerie whistling of the wind blowing through the empty, twisting streets of an abandoned town. The air feels cold and dead. The plague kills between 30 to 60% of the human population. Millions of people perish in a matter of months, their bodies filling the graveyards until there is no more room to dig. The disease tears through the castles, the monasteries, and the peasant huts with terrifying equality. The humans blame the alignment of the planets, the wrath of God, and the poisoned wells. They fail to look down at the dirt beneath their feet, where the true engine of their destruction multiplies without restraint. The plague bacteria travels inside the stomachs of fleas. These fleas ride on the backs of the black rats. Without the cats to patrol the cellars, the grain silos, and the alleyways, the rat population explodes into an unstoppable tidal wave. They swarm the cities, feeding on the garbage, breeding in the walls, and bringing the deadly fleas directly into the human beds. Decades of burning the ultimate predator created an artificial paradise for the vermin. The mathematics of biology balance the scales with terrifying precision. You look at the empty cobblestone streets, hearing only the wind and the creaking of unhinged wooden doors. We killed the guardians of the night out of blind superstition. We burned the shield that had protected human civilization since the days of the first wheat harvests in the Fertile Crescent. And when the shield shattered, the shadows they kept at bay poured out of the cracks and swallowed the society whole. The tragedy of the Black Death stands as a grim monument to the consequences of breaking the ancient truce. Even during the darkest chapters of human history, compassion refuses to die completely. While the mobs of Western Europe let their fear dictate their actions, Vast pockets of preservation hold the line across the rest of the world. The feline species survives because of the quiet defiance of people who choose love over panic. In the Islamic world, the cat retains its status as a respected, clean animal. The culture tells the famous story of the Prophet Muhammad, sitting in quiet reflection while his favourite cat sleeps soundly on the flowing sleeve of his robe. When the call to prayer sounds, he faces a choice. Rather than disturb the sleeping animal, he uses a knife to cut the fabric of his sleeve, leaving the cat to rest in peace while he rises to pray. Focus on that incredibly soft, delicate snipping of metal scissors cutting through smooth silk fabric. The subtle parting of the threads represents a profound respect for the comfort of another creature. This level of reverence guarantees the safety of cats across the Middle East and North Africa. They patrol the libraries of the scholars and the courtyards of the mosques, protected by the stories of the faith. Further north, the Slavic pagan traditions also push back against the hysteria. The rural farmers of the East view the cat as a manifestation of the household spirit, a quiet guardian bringing good fortune to the hearth. Even within the borders of Western Europe, the true farmers ignore the church decrees. A man who watches his winter grain supply disappear into the mouths of rats doesn't care about the Pope's opinion. He leaves a bowl of milk near the barn door, encouraging the strays to stay and work. The cats that survive the massacres adapt by retreating from the fires. They undergo a temporary rewilding, stepping away from the cities and moving into the dense forests. They breed with the native wildcats, relying on their ancient instincts to survive in the brush until the madness of humanity burns itself out. The turning of the centuries brings the Reformation and the Renaissance. The iron grip of medieval superstition slowly loosens, replaced by a returning interest in science, art, and the natural world. The hysteria fades, and the humans slowly lower their torches. The feral cats cautiously emerge from the woods and the barns, testing the waters of the human settlements once again. They find the doors slightly open. The Dark Era ends, proving that even when humanity descends into its most ignorant depths, there are always a few quiet souls keeping the ancient promises alive. The dawn of the Age of Exploration changes the map of the world forever. The empires of Europe look outward, seeking new trade routes, new lands, and new wealth. They fell massive forests, shaping the timber into fleets of wooden ships capable of crossing the vast, terrifying oceans. These ships become floating fortresses, packed with the supplies necessary to sustain a crew for months at sea. They load tons of grain, barrels of salted meat, and sacks of fine flour deep into the dark, damp cargo holds. But a wooden ship filled with food creates the exact same biological beacon as the ancient mud brick granaries of Egypt. They become drifting buffets for the rat. Focus on the deep, rhythmic groaning of the heavy wooden ship beams swaying in the trough of the open ocean. The massive timbers creak and complain against the force of the waves, creating a constant low-frequency vibration that shakes the deck. The ocean sprays salt across the bow. Below the waterline, the darkness hides a lethal threat to the voyage. The rats chew through the wooden hulls, they destroy the ropes holding the sails, and they spoil the drinking water with disease. A ship overrun by rats is a ship doomed to sink or starve before it ever sees land. The captains of these vessels realize they cannot conquer the oceans alone. The ship's cats become a mandatory life-saving addition to every single voyage. They write them into the naval manifests, granting them the status of official crew members. The ancient hunter steps off the desert sand and onto the shifting, unstable platform of the sea. Mix the groaning of the wood with the soft, determined scrape of claws gripping the deck, maintaining perfect balance as the ship rolls over a massive wave. The cats adapt to the smell of salt and the constant motion. They patrol the claustrophobic corridors of the lower decks, hunting in the pitch-black hold, swinging between the swinging hammocks of the sailors. They protect the ropes, they guard the flour, and they keep the morale of the terrified men intact. The cats mapped the world completely by accident. They didn't care about the gold, the spices, or the glory of the empires. They simply chased their prey onto a floating island, trading the dry heat of the ancient world for a wooden universe surrounded by deadly water, holding the line against the dark while the humans steered by the stars. The wooden fleets carry their feline cargo to the absolute edges of the earth. The Portuguese caravels push down the coastline of Africa, the Spanish galleons cross the Atlantic to the Americas, and the Dutch traders navigate the treacherous waters toward the East Indies. Everywhere the ships drop anchor, the cats step off the deck and onto the shores of new worlds. Listen to the heavy, echoing thud of a thick wooden gangplank dropping onto the soft, untouched soil of a foreign coastline. The sound marks the arrival of the ultimate global conqueror. The humans stumble off the ships, exhausted and hungry, eager to build forts and clear the land. But the tiny predators slip away into the brush, their senses flooded with the overwhelming input of a new ecosystem. They walk into the humid, sweltering tropical forests of the Amazon. They explore the dry, sweeping plains of the American West. They sit on the porches of bamboo houses in the Asian tropics. The commerce and colonialism of the human empires act as the ultimate global distribution network, scattering the DNA of the African wildcat across every single continent. Everywhere humanity breaks new ground, they disturb the earth, build storage houses, and attract the local rodents. And immediately they realize they need the ancient truce they forged back in the Fertile Crescent. The settlers build a cabin in the woods, the mice move in, and the cat arrives to restore the balance. The adaptability of the species is staggering. They learn to hunt unfamiliar prey, adjusting their tactics to catch new species of birds, strange lizards, and fast-moving jungle insects. The felines weave themselves into the fabric of these new societies. They sit on the docks of the sprawling port cities, watching the ships load and unload their cargo, claiming the crates of tea and the barrels of rum as their personal hunting grounds. They don't conquer through force. They conquer through sheer necessity. The human race creates the infrastructure, but the cat occupies it, securing its place as the shadow that follows the light of human expansion. But this perfect biological design holds a dark, terrifying consequence for the untouched corners of the earth. During the 18th and 19th centuries, the exploring ships reached the most isolated islands on the planet. They drop anchor off the coasts of Australia, New Zealand, Hawaii, and the scattered atolls of the Pacific Ocean. These landmasses broke away from the continents millions of years ago, evolving in total isolation. They harbour delicate ecosystems that never developed large mammalian predators. The native wildlife never learned to fear a creature with soft paws and razor-sharp teeth. Feel the unnatural, holding its breath silence of a native island forest just before a lethal, unfamiliar pounce. The wind stops. The leaves hang completely still. A flightless, ground-nesting bird pecks at the moss, lacking the genetic instinct to look over its shoulder. The marsupials move slowly through the underbrush, completely unaware that a perfect killing machine just stepped off a wooden boat. The ship cats, abandoned by the sailors, or wandering away from the beach camps, walk into an absolute paradise of defenseless prey. The tragedy of introducing an apex predator into a defenseless Eden begins to unfold. The cats multiply rapidly in the mild climates, reverting to their wild instincts and devastating the local populations. They hunt the ancient bird species to the brink of extinction. They decimate the small mammals that have no evolutionary defense against a creature that strikes with such blinding speed. The grim data of the modern ecological record traces the disappearance of dozens of unique species directly back to the jaws of the marooned felines. The very traits that saved human civilization in the granaries of Egypt become the exact tools that unravel the delicate balance of the islands. The cat is too efficient, too capable, and too perfectly designed. The humans brought their saviour with them to the edges of the earth, failing to realize that a saviour in a city of stone becomes a demon in a forest of glass. The silence of the island breaks with the sudden flutter of wings, cut short by the ancient reflexes of the desert hunter. The centuries spent at sea weave the cat directly into the folklore and the heart of naval tradition. The hardened, superstitious sailors, isolated from the rest of the world for months at a time, elevate their feline crewmates to the status of legends. They tell stories of famous cats over the flickering oil lamps of the lower decks. They speak of Trim the cat, a brave, adventurous feline who sailed with Captain Matthew Flinders, literally helping to map and circumnavigate the massive coastline of Australia in the early 1800s. Listen to the faint clinking of a small metal medal gently striking against a leather collar. The sound stands out, clear and sharp, amid the quiet, continuous lapping of dark water against the steel hull of a modern warship. This sound honours Simon, the famous rat-catcher of the HMS Amethyst. In 1949, during a brutal conflict on the Yangtze River, Simon survived artillery shell fire, recovered from his terrible wounds, and returned to his post guarding the ship's dwindling food supply. The government awarded him the Dickin Medal for animal gallantry, proving that the courage of the feline extends far beyond the barnyard. The isolation of the maritime world also shapes the physical future of the species. Ships sail to distant ports and leave small populations of cats behind to breed in total separation from the rest of the world. A ship stops in the freezing, harsh climate of the American Northeast, leaving behind cats that breed into the massive, thick-coated, water-resistant Maine Coons. A merchant vessel visits the warm courts of Siam, bringing back the sleek, vocal, striking Siamese cats. The ocean currents act as a massive genetic sorting machine, separating the colours and the shapes into the distinct breeds we recognise today. In the terrifying vastness of the ocean, a purring animal resting on a coil of rope served as a living anchor to the concept of home. The sailors looked at the cat and remembered the warmth of the hearth, the safety of the village, and the promise of a return to dry land. The cat survived the deep water by stealing the hearts of the men who sailed it. The world shifts again as the 19th century brings the roar of industrialization. The human population explodes, leaving the farms and pouring into the rapidly expanding urban centres. We build towering cities of brick, iron, and glass. The humans pack themselves into vertical apartment buildings and crowded tenements, stacking their lives on top of one another. The wide open spaces of the fields vanish under a blanket of soot and pavement. The cat must adapt to a shrinking world, transitioning from a tolerated outdoor barn worker into an intimate indoor roommate. Focus on the sounds of the Victorian city. A distant rhythmic hiss of a steam train releases pressure into the cold night air. The fog rolls off the River Thames, thick and damp, swallowing the street corners. Then comes the soft, deliberate click of a brass gas lamp igniting, casting a warm, flickering glow through the window of a small brick parlour. The world outside the window feels claustrophobic, dirty, and overwhelmingly anonymous. The architecture of stacked housing forces a profound physical and emotional proximity between the human and the animal. The citizens of the industrial age face a new, crushing epidemic, the deep loneliness of urban life. They sit in their small rooms, surrounded by thousands of neighbours they don't know, feeling totally disconnected from the natural world. The cat bridges that gap. They sit on the windowsill watching the rain hit the glass, their chest vibrating with a low, comforting purr. We built cities of iron that isolated us from the rhythms of the earth, so we invited a small piece of the ancient wild inside to keep us company. The cat trades the endless horizon for a cushion by the fire. They don't need the massive territory of a dog to feel content. They map the vertical space of the apartment, claiming the tops of the bookshelves and the backs of the armchairs. The Victorian citizen reaches down to stroke the fur of the animal, feeling a connection to a simpler, older time. The rat catcher becomes the confidant, absorbing the silent anxieties of the modern world. The aesthetic appreciation of the indoor cat reaches a spectacular climax in the year 1871. The setting is the Crystal Palace in London, a massive, breathtaking structure built entirely of gleaming iron and thousands of panes of glass. Underneath this monumental dome, a man named Harrison Weir organises an event that permanently alters the human perception of the feline. He hosts the world's very first official cat show. He gathers the alley cats, the pampered pets, and the exotic imports, placing them in decorated cages for the public to admire. Tune into the low, echoing murmur of a well-dressed Victorian crowd, reverberating beneath the vaulted glass ceiling. The ladies rustle their heavy silk dresses, and the gentlemen whisper behind their hands, pointing at the animals with fascination. Francis Simpson begins to chronicle the event, writing down the descriptions of the different coats, the eye colours, and the body shapes. This moment marks the invention of the cat fancy, the deliberate application of Victorian pedigree standards to an animal formerly viewed simply as a disposable pest controller. Weir elevates the cat to an object of high admiration, an artistic critique. He names the categories, he defines the standards of perfection, and he hands out ribbons to the winners. This seemingly frivolous event holds massive psychological weight. When a society places an animal on a velvet pedestal to judge its beauty, the relationship transitions from practical utility to pure imagination. The humans are no longer just using the cat, they are dreaming about its potential. They begin to breed for aesthetic joy rather than hunting efficiency. They want longer fur, brighter eyes, and more striking patterns. The Crystal Palace show strips away the dark, superstitious baggage of the medieval era, washing the cat clean of its demonic associations. Under the bright, modern light of the glass dome, the creature is reborn as a creature of elegance, status, and refined domestic grace. The murmur of the crowd seals the deal. The cat has officially conquered the highest tiers of human society. The cultural elevation of the cat sparks a wave of artistic and commercial invention, designed to make their indoor lives permanent. The artists of the era begin to reflect the new status of the feline. Lewis Wayne paints his famous, trippy, anthropomorphic cats, showing them playing cards, drinking tea, and wearing human clothes. Beatrix Potter writes them into her beloved stories, humanizing their minds for generations of children. The image of the cat softens, becoming a staple of domestic comfort. Listen to the slow, mechanical click, the winding whir of a heavy brass gear, and the soft, blinding flash of a 19th century camera. The early photographers wrestle with their bulky equipment, trying to capture the perfectly still, solemn poses of the family cat. They treat the animal with the dignity of a human subject, framing them against painted backdrops and velvet chairs. But keeping an animal permanently indoors requires practical, dirty solutions. The mid-20th century brings the invention of commercial cat food, freeing the owner from the task of securing fresh meat and allowing the cat to rely entirely on the grocery store. Even more crucial is the invention of indoor sanitation. For decades, owners used boxes filled with dirt, sand, or fireplace ashes to manage the waste. But the breakthrough of absorbent clay litter changes the geometry of the house. It eliminates the smell and makes indoor living perfectly hygienic. The moment we built a box of specialized sand inside our own homes, we finalized a massive biological contract. We brought their bathroom inside our walls. We bound their survival completely to our care, closing the door to the outside world. The camera flashes again, capturing the domestic ideal. The cat no longer needs to hunt, no longer needs to freeze in the winter, and no longer needs to hide from the larger predators. They trade the infinite dangers of total freedom for the absolute security of a warm lap and a scheduled meal. The timeline shifts into the modern era. From the year 1950 to the early 2000s, the human population skyrockets from 2 billion to over 6 billion souls, and the cats ride the wave of our success. In the United States alone, over 90 million cats sleep inside human homes. The scientific community finally turns its advanced microscopes and behavioral tests toward the animal that sits on our laps. For centuries, the myth persisted that cats are aloof, unfeeling creatures that only tolerate humans for the food. Modern biochemistry steps in to shatter that illusion. Focus on a deep, incredibly slow, rhythmic sound. It's the pulsing of a heartbeat, representing the invisible chemical surge flowing through the veins of both the human and the animal. Science proves that cats understand the complex gestures of human communication. They track the movement of a pointing finger, a skill that even our closest primate relatives struggle to grasp. They know the specific sound of their own names, their ears twitching in recognition even when they choose to ignore the call. They show secure attachment to their owners, demonstrating visible distress when separated and profound relief when reunited. But the ultimate proof lies in the blood. Researchers measure the levels of oxytocin, the powerful mammalian bonding hormone responsible for the feeling of love and trust between a mother and her child. When a human softly strokes the fur of their cat and the cat begins to purr, the oxytocin levels in both species spike. The invisible chemical bridge solidifies. The love you feel for the creature is not a one-way street, and it isn't a trick of your imagination. The science proves what cat owners knew for 10,000 years. The affection is written into their biology. The slow, rhythmic pulse of the heartbeat proves that the ancient wildcat learned to love the giant ape. The barrier between the species dissolved in the chemical soup of the brain, forging an emotional alliance that outlasted the pharaohs, the plagues, and the sailing ships. We arrive at the present moment, deep into the digital age. The early 2000s transformed the internet into a global network, and immediately humanity used this ultimate communication tool to share videos of their cats. The ancient hunter of the scrublands became the reigning icon of the indoor world, spawning memes, viral fame, and massive global rescue networks. They sit on our keyboards, they interrupt our screens, and they demand our attention. But strip away the technology, the screens, and the modern noise. The core reality remains identical to the night they first approached our ancient fires. Listen to the soft, rhythmic clicking of a computer mouse echoing in a quiet, dark room. The clicking slows down, fading away, and slowly dissolves into a deep, vibrating purr right beside your ear. Let the sound wash over you. The 10,000-year agreement holds firm. They traded the absolute freedom of the harsh, starving wild for the safety of our walls. We traded our food, our space, and our clean clothes to live near a tiny, opinionated predator. You look at the creature resting its head on your chest. You aren't just petting a pet. You are honouring an ancient truce. Your hands trace the exact physical lines of the African wildcat. You stroke the fur of a survivor that walked through the shifting sands of the Fertile Crescent, guarded the majestic silos of Egypt, survived the brutal bonfires of the medieval dark, and sailed across the crushing waves of the unknown oceans. The purr vibrates against your skin, a continuous, unbroken song of survival. As the night deepens, let your mind rest on this profound connection. The wild is not gone, it's simply learned to trust you. Let your breathing slow down to match the rhythm of the purr. If this journey through time brought you a moment of peace, softly leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and let your eyes drift close. The history of the world sleeps right beside you. The shadow is safe, the fire is warm. Allow the dark to take you and sleep well.